Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as blackbraziltoday.com, the blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So today I'm going to talk about something that I would say it's going to be like a series of videos I'm going to be creating, maybe not all in succession, but definitely wanted to approach this topic. And it's not just one specific topic, it's a bunch of topics that all go together, whether it has to do with the image of Brazilian women in the world, um, whether it has to do with sexual tourism, whether it has to do with the viewpoints people have of the feminism as it's going down in Brazil, um, the funk culture, or what they call funky, cultura funky, that's going on in the country. There are various attitudes towards all of these topics. Some people have no problem with these things. Other people have serious problems with it, and in many ways, the country has been divided. Among the more liberal and the more conservative elements. So when we get into topics about Brazilian women, there's a lot of opinions. You know, particularly when I'm considering what people who don't live in Brazil, what they think when it comes to mind, what comes to their mind when they think of the words Brazilian woman or Brazilian women. Um, Obviously, there are a lot of people who are proud of a particular image that Brazilian women have, whether it's true or false, or how many people partake in certain images and, where there's a badge of honor, or there are certain elements of the population that totally reject certain images that people have of Brazilian women outside of the country. So it's really difficult to get a full view of some of these topics without going into each one of them like one at a time, you know. And a lot of topics that have to do with Brazil, I've had to change my own outlook, my own opinion on certain things. And, we're all allowed to do that. When you come into more knowledge or you experience certain things, it's very possible that you could change your outlook and your perspective on that, whatever given topic that it might be. So, I had already done a video. I don't know if I did a video on it yet, but there was a piece on the blog, the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where one particular Brazilian woman wrote a piece about, why is the image of the Brazilian woman the way that it is around the world? And there are a lot of opinions on that. And generally the opinions, generally they agree with why women from Brazil have this certain image outside of the country. I'm not saying that I agree with the image. I'm not saying that people deserve to have a certain image. It's another one of those things where um when X amount of people represent a group in some ways, sometimes people may analyze the entire group based on a couple of people who are most visibly representing that group. Some people look at the singer Anita. I did a piece on her a couple of weeks back. And as much as success that she's had outside of Brazil and within Brazil, there are people who totally, idolize and are very happy for her success. And there's other elements of Brazil, uh, other parcels of the population that are totally ashamed of the image that she presents around the world because they feel it's unfair that one woman has she's gained such notoriety around the world, but yet the image that she presents is one that's going to perhaps unfairly uh, bring a certain image to Brazilian women. And you can't really say, we're talking about if we say that Brazilian women are the majority of the country, is it really fair to say that one woman and her image represents over 100, maybe 110 million women or people or just females when they a large percentage of the female population are under the age of 18. But I'm just saying, just the image of Brazilian females around the world. and what are the ramifications of Anita's success around the world? That's not something I'm going to take on today, but it's something I've been paying attention to for a while. Anita has become one of the biggest stars that ever come out of Brazil. It used to be a time, once upon a time, that only somebody like Pele was an international star representing Brazil. He was the most important and most well-known Brazilian around the world. Today, I would argue is probably Anita or maybe Gisele Bündchen. Of course, we know Gisele Bündchen is in the news because of her relationship with Tom Brady at this point. But obviously she carved out her own niche in the modeling world. But anyway, don't want to go too far off a topic today. I'm going to talk about something that it's it's a controversial topic. Um, a lot of Brazilian women don't particularly care for the image that foreigners might pop into the mind of the foreigner when they think of Brazilian women, because it's like, as I just said, it's not fair that certain images are cast upon all people from that group, because some have developed certain reputations, right? So this article is actually taken from 2014, and it was either, I think it might have been a little bit after the World Cup festivities had ended. As we know, Brazil was awarded two huge global events, from 2014 and 2016. One was the 2014 World Cup, and the other was the 2016. I think it was the Summer Olympics. I don't remember. I just remember it was the Olympics in 2016 that were held in Rio. So while there was a lot of talk about what was going on the field, uh, in terms of the Brazilian national team, and we remember, anybody who remembers that World Cup knows that Brazil just got massacred. I think it was might have been in the semifinals against Germany. It was like they got beat 7-1. It was humiliating for the whole country. But there were probably for years to come, there's going to be studies talking about some of the things that came out of that World Cup, what it did for Brazil around the world, what happened to the economy afterward, how much money was invested in building all of these stadiums in various cities across the country, the actual World Cup tournament. Then there was this whole thing of foreigners, or what Brazilians call gringos, that were coming to the country, and the whole sexual tourism industry. So Brazil is a popular destination, for sex tourism. I mean, it's just a fact. It's true. So I thought it would be intriguing to discuss this topic, uh, given that nowadays on the internet, particularly in the Black manosphere, there's a lot of men who are curious about, what about Brazilian women. I can't speak for all African American men. Obviously, I've been, had close contact with Brazil for over the last 22 years, where, I lived in Sao Paulo for 9 years. And, I have my own opinions about, some of the images that people have. It's curious because there's this whole discussion that I think started like back in 2004 or five, somewhere in there, when there was an article in Essence magazine, and then there was a book that came out, and both of these books were talking about African American men traveling to Brazil. Some of them obviously were participating in sexual tourism, while others were looking for serious relationships. So this particular piece obviously is not speaking on long-term relationships. It has to do with Brazilian women talking about how sexual tourism and images connected to sexuality and how they affect Black women in Brazil, and you could say just Brazilian women as a whole. So this particular piece is called "It's Time to Give a Red Card to Sexual Tourism. My flesh doesn't belong to Carnival nor the World Cup." Okay. So keep in mind this article is from 2014, but I feel it's a good piece to revisit, because even though this article is about 8 years old, it still speaks to the image, the situation, and the stereotypes that a lot of non-Brazilians have when it comes to Brazilian women. So just I wanted to get into this because some of the things I read that was going on during World Cup in 2014, and I was there. It was just wild. I'm not, obviously, this is just going to be one small article right now, but there's a lot of material that was coming out, because when you have such an event that's such a global draw, a global attraction, there's going to be a lot of stuff written about that particular event. So this particular article is just one woman's view of all of these foreigners coming into Brazil, and obviously a lot of them were participating in sexual tourism, and just how Brazilian agencies and companies were participating in that in certain types of ways, where it was almost like they were advertising. That's a whole nother history itself, because in reality, Brazil has been marketing its women around the world for decades. Then that's a whole nother story. Right now, I'm going to focus particularly on this piece. So, the preparation, spectacle, and eventual outcome of the 2014 World Cup will no doubt be discussed, studied, researched, and debated for many years to come, both inside and outside of Brazil. While the most memorable, or should we say forgettable, regrettable moments of the Cup was Brazil's 7-1 thrashing at the hands of the eventual winner, Germany, the jokes, comments, tears, and disappointment from the Brazilian perspective will not be forgotten for a long time. The previous villain of Brazil's World Cup disappointment lived a tormented life for 50 years, after or until his death in the year 2000. That's a piece I would like to. I'm not going to get much into that now, but it explores. Brazil has this history of soccer, or what they call football, or football overseas. Um, but anyone who has followed NFL football in the United States knows that there was always a stigma attached to black quarterbacks that seems to have loosened up, like in the last few decades. In Brazil, the stigma was attached to black goalies. So this particular story that I was talking about um, was talking about the last black goalie, starting goalie for a Brazilian national team back in 1950, and he was the one who was blamed for Brazil's loss in that World Cup. Um, One of the pieces that I did spoke about how this might actually be the one. Yeah, it says at least one person was happy about Brazil's World Cup disaster. That was the daughter of the black goalie who was blamed for the team's 1950 defeat. This was an intriguing case story, and ever since that loss in 1950, the Brazilian national team coaches have been very hesitant about having a starting goalie that was black. It was like it was considered bad luck. I think what was his name? Jiba, I can't remember his name. I think he was the one of the first black goalies after the 1950 World Cup to start for Brazil as a goalie. So, intriguing story. This idea of the black athlete in Brazilian sports, particularly in soccer, which is the national sport. Everybody loves soccer there. Anyway, and that particular loss in 1950 was actually a close game. Imagine how long it will take for the 2014 humiliation to pass over. But these are facts related directly to the game. There are so many other ways of analyzing the World Cup of that year: the number of tourists, the profits, the image of Brazil after such a major event. In fact, Brazil's image around the world is indirectly one of the topics of today's post. For another intriguing topic involving the cup is the sex industry. As reported on this blog back in March of 2013, working girls were also preparing to get their slice of the billions of reais that the cup was expected to bring into the country. Now, reais is the name of the Brazil's national currency, is the Brazilian real, which is whenever you're in Brazil, if you're an American tourist, you have to trade your American dollars to get, Brazilian reais. Um, so what this particular piece is talking about was that in preparation for that World Cup of that year, in the city of Belo Horizonte is like one of the, I don't know if it's the number 5 or number 6 most populous city in the country. It's in the state of Minas Gerais. But in that particular city, it was a story that broke that showed how the prostitutes in that city were learning English and Spanish to get prepared for, the gringos, the foreign men that were going to be coming into the country. They wanted to be able to do their job and be able to, converse with their clients. So a lot of these women were learning English and Spanish, as those were expected to be two of the major languages that the gringos coming into the country would be speaking. Anyway, and to be sure, there were probably plenty of tourists who indulged in that part of Brazil as well. And as the dust from the cup continues to settle and attention now moves towards the 2016 Olympic Games to be held in Rio, maybe it's again time to consider how the country sees itself, how it presents itself, and the effects on its citizens. As written on the blog several times in the past, in general, when non Brazilians think of the country, they think of great soccer, sun, sand, samba, and sex. And positive or negative, Brazil plays a huge part in promoting these images, not only through its marketing, but also due to a continued exclusion from access to paths out of poverty for the majority of its citizens. And with so many avenues to better lifestyle still out of the reach of millions of people, the power elite take advantage of the situation to further exploit the citizens who find themselves stuck on the bottom rungs of society and willingly or unwillingly partake in the selling of these images. A good example of how elites exploit the situation is the story of popular television host Luciano Huck. He was criticized for seemingly promoting the prostitution of Brazilian women to gringos during the tournament. In a tweet and online message that was liked 22,000 times and shared 3,000 times, the TV host wrote, that's what it says right here. This is what this tweet is reading here. Are you in Rio? Are you single? Do you want an enchanting prince among the gringos that are in your city? It says, send your photos and the reason why. And then, it leaves the email address here. It says, the email address meaning is the email address itself says namorada para gringo at globalmail.com. Global being the country's top television network, for which Luciano Huck was a host on a popular Saturday morning variety show. The email address itself actually translated, it means girlfriend for foreigner. He posted a similar message on his global TV website. Typical of an opportunist, keep in mind Luciano Huck's connection to the whole fiasco in which he promoted a t-shirt with the slogan, "We're all monkeys," on the front of it to fight racism. Now, what was this all about? This was, I think it dates back to 2013, maybe. Let me see when this article pops up. Something happened over in, I think it was in Spain, or somewhere in Europe. A lot of Brazilian soccer players play football over in Europe. And there was a whole issue with the racism that was coming out of European soccer stadiums. And in one particular game, let's see if we can find a picture. One of Brazil's star players who was playing for, I think, what was it, Barcelona? And somebody threw a banana on the field, because obviously people throw bananas at black players to say, oh, they're a bunch of monkeys. So Daniel Alves, who is a Brazilian, he's one of the 2 or 3 Brazilians that was on the team at that time over in Barcelona. He picked up the banana in the middle of the game and just ate it, right? So I would find out later that the whole thing appeared to be a publicity stunt, right? But because it just seems like it had to have been a stunt, because instantly, almost immediately after the story hit the press, somebody sparked this idea of everybody pose with a banana to fight against racism. Brazilians often say, in order to deflect away from the possibility that people are racist in the country, and they'll just say, we're all equal, right? Nós somos todos iguais. They would say, we're all equal. It basically deflects the reality of how Black Brazilians are treated. It's like a national denial that people continue to deny. Oh, we don't have racism. We don't have racism here. That's a thing in the United States. But this guy, I don't know if this dude Huck, he was the like I said, this was the TV host, and I think this was his whole plan. And all of a sudden, when this happened on that field in Barcelona, in Spain, they kicked off this whole campaign that we're, nós somos todos macacos, and like, we're all monkeys. And you got all of these are all well-known Brazilians right here. You got Neymar here. You got Marta, who's like the top female soccer player in the country. This is, Huck and his wife. And all of these people are posing with bananas. It was like a huge joke. And, my question was, I'm like, this is how you deal with racist incidents? Everybody says we're all monkeys, and people start posing with bananas. Like, so this is the way Brazil deals with racism, right? So that's it seems like Hookie would always pop up in things like this, just publicity stunts or whatever. So he he was online, and it seemed like he was just promoting Brazilian girls to foreigners who were coming into the country because of the World Cup. Anyway, with these types of attitudes being part of the Brazilian way for so long, how does this reflect on women who are not part of the program? Now, I put the word program in quotation marks because in Brazil, programa can mean just a program, but programa is also a term that means it refers to a girl who's turning tricks. When people say garota de programa, it means she's like a hooker or she's a call girl. So girls who are not part of the program, it's kind of like a double meaning there because being not saying you're not with the program obviously is something, I'm not into that. But not being part of the program also means that this is not a girl who participates in, turning tricks. And what about the women who are actually willing participants? Are these women willing participants because they're getting a piece of the pie? Have they just numbed themselves to a Brazilian reality? And how does the whole sexual tourism business specifically affect women, girls, according to skin color? Too many questions and opinions to consider here, but here's one woman's perspective. So this is a piece from the popular blog of it's called Blogueiras Negras. It's a blog with various different Black Brazilian women writers. A lot of these women come out of academia. A lot of them are professionals. So this was an article that came out in 2014, just talking about the whole connection between the image of Brazilian women and in the sex industry. So the article is entitled "My Flesh Doesn't Belong to Carnival nor the World Cup," and it's by Paula Nunes. Again, originally posted at the Blogueiras Negras website. Only a few weeks ago, the most anticipated event of the year, the FIFA World Cup 2014, ended. Much has been discussed about the legacy of the world, which left thousands homeless in exchange for the construction of stadiums, made the federal government invest millions of reais into policing and weapons, and keeping to this day people in jail for protesting against it. In the stadiums, only the white elite and the Brazilian middle class, i.e., we pay the bill, but who saw the cup up close were foreigners and the wealthy. Now, that was something else that came out they mounted like several stadiums in some of the major cities around Brazil. But when you looked in the stands of those stadiums, you didn't really see a representative of the whole Brazilian people. You saw mostly white people in the stands there. And that's what she's talking about here. In the stadiums, only the white elite and the Brazilian middle class, right? During the period of the realization of the event, another subject, which in no way is detached from the global project of the realization of the cup, drew much attention: tourism and sexual exploitation. The theme was not as reported by the mainstream media as the defeat of Brazil by a count of 7-1 against the Germans in the semifinals. But since before the start of the event, the social movements warned about how the level of exploitation would increase with its approximation and with advertisements that made women attractive to tourists. So this is talking about the offer of sexual tourism increases in some of the cities that were hosting World Cup events. All right. Let's see here. According to a report in the newspaper Folha de Sao Paulo earlier this year, businessmen involved in sexual exploitation had estimated an increase of 60% in the prostitution market during the World Cup. It's not easy to find official data on sexual exploitation during the World Cup, but it was enough to walk near the stadiums or the streets most frequented by tourists in the host cities to see women, children, transvestites, and transsexuals selling their bodies as a commodity on every corner. The British newspaper The Mirror reported that girls aged 11 to 14 were prostituting themselves in the region of the Itaquerão Stadium in the east zone of Sao Paulo. For us, nothing new, but a great reason for revolt. Okay, so who's to say? I don't know if these girls were actually prostituting themselves, these girls in this particular picture, but it was something that people saw. So whether these girls were actually prostitutes or they were not, there were several reports of underage girls prostituting themselves during the 2014 Cup in Brazil. Sexual exploitation has a race, gender, and class. The image of the mulata is sold as an exportation and advertising product to invite tourists to visit our country during the World Cup, while the federal government and the mainstream media attempted to convince the population that we should receive the tourists well in our house. So one thing to understand here is this has been going on since way before the 2014 World Cup. Uh, Brazilian advertising putting out glossy flyers in different countries in Europe with images of semi-nude Brazilian women to attract these tourists coming into the country. Um, so we can take a look at this billboard. Pretty leaves very little to the imagination, but I have to explain this right here. It says "Torça para a seleção brasileira porque aqui a espanhola é favorita." Right? Cheer for the Brazilian team because here the Spanish is the favorite. So what does this mean? Okay, how can I put this without getting too graphic about it? Okay, so the term Española translated into English means Spanish, right? But how can I put this? The term Española in Portuguese, well, spoken in Brazil, it refers to, if you look at this image here, the woman is wearing like goldy gloves, but she's covering up her breast, right? In Brazil, the Española is a sexual act between a male penis and a woman's breast. So this is what the word Española means here. So it's a double entendre here. If you're underage, you may not understand what this billboard means, but the term Española and then the woman covering herself is very clear. And this is a very, blatant billboard. Like you can't really get around it. Anybody who's Brazilian knows what an Española is. It's almost like, most Americans don't speak Spanish, but they know what a menage a trois is, right? So the origin of the word mulata is very curious. In the post-slavery period, the idea that white women were for marrying was strengthened. Women of very dark skin were so ugly that they served only for work, and mulatas, the fruit of the mixing between black and white, were only for having sex, just like the animal, the mule, that could not have children. And if they did, they were exclusively their responsibility. It seems to me even today little has changed. Now, she made a reference to a very popular Brazilian saying that says white women for marriage, mulatto women for fornication, and black women for work. Very popular saying in Brazil. That there's been just numerous studies that have referred to this popular saying. I don't know how long that saying's been around, but it's been decades. So then here is another billboard here. What you think is going on here is a controversial billboard provoked more discussion on the topic of sexual tourism, right? As if that weren't enough, there was the scandalous propaganda shirt from Adidas with a heart that simulated the butt of a woman, or a nightclub billboard containing a picture of a black woman performing oral sex on a football player. We are obliged to see every year at Carnival time the hypersexualized image of black women on television, in magazines, and in advertisements for travel agencies. So this is what you see going on here. She just basically broke it down. And what she's saying is that every year during the Carnival season, this is, a globally known image where you just see scantily clad, uh, increasingly white women, but you see a lot of brown and dark skinned black women on parade, half naked, during Carnival time. And this is an image that Brazil spreads all over the world. Like, come down here and get some of this, right? This is the T-shirt that she was talking about. How these T-shirts, it took the heart and it was upside down. Obviously, you can see what the image is supposed to be here. This T-shirt here says, "Looking to score in Brazil." So, obviously has a double entendre going on there between, scoring, in terms of a soccer goal versus scoring with women as well. Adidas T-shirts promoted during the World Cup. The myth of racial democracy continues trying to put in our heads that we are not black, all the time trying to whiten us. It's just interesting that we recognize ourselves as negatives or black women in the moment of exploiting our bodies. So what she's talking about here is something that I talk about in almost every video, where Brazil has always tried to downplay the black element of the country, not only by using terms that can act as a way of hiding how black the country is, but also promoting miscegenation so that the population becomes progressively lighter skinned, and also, um, how can we say, encouraging Brazilians of African descent not to define themselves as negra or preta, both terms which mean black. They export the idea that we are the face of Brazil. We complete the idea of the country of soccer and samba, but unfortunately for some women, prostitution is not an option. For many Black women residents of the periferia, meaning the periphery, the outskirts, or the poor neighborhoods, who on average have 5 years of education, according to research by the IPEA released in 2013, prostitution is perhaps the only alternative to sustain their families. You see this image of a girl that's 17, and somebody's asking her, how old are you? She says she's 17. The precariousness of labor, low education, and sexual exploitation are social problems, but also racial. We were champions of the World Cup, but we are in the world ranking of champion countries in sexual exploitation and human trafficking. It's time to give a red card to sexual tourism. So that's the piece that's, again, it's from 2014, but it's just very revealing. Here it is, still 8 years later. So just to go back to some of the terms that I used while I was going through the article, I already spoke briefly about the Española, which refers to a Spanish person, but it also refers to a sexual act in which a man simulates the friction of sexual intercourse between a woman's breasts. 2, the long-time saying, white women for marriage, mulatta for sex, black women for work, has been used in a number of posts on this blog. And as Nunes's reference shows, this hierarchy clearly exists among women in Brazil. 3, several articles on the blog deal with the Brazilian discourse of persuading persons of visible African descent that they are not, in fact, negros or black people. People are routinely defined as mulatas, morenas, pardas, etc. These are all terms that, they give the idea some level of racial admixture. Mulatas being, a woman is supposed to be produced between a black and a white, if they get together. Pardas, a lot of people don't like how English is translating pardas, where they be mixed or brown. Parda is supposed to mean somewhere between black and white also. And as I was saying, the ever popular term morena, almost anybody can be a morena except for redheads and blondes. You can be a morena, a white person with dark hair, a white person with a tan, a light-skinned black person, a mixed person, a dark-skinned black person. All of these people could be defined as morenas, right? It's in the how can we put it? It's just a very vague term. It depends on who's using it and who they're describing. There's so many different ways you can interpret when someone says they're talking about a morena. Like, to this day, I can't really say what that looks like, because a morena can look like almost anything. One group was recently thrown out of a restaurant precisely because they were black, but then not defined as such on the police report. In another case, a government agency didn't even offer the term preto or negro, both meaning black, to choose from on an ID application. All of these cases are simply extensions of Brazil's long history of attempting to erase blackness. So this is going to be just the first of numerous other articles I have in the works that's going to talk about, as I said, this question of feminism, the funk culture, how women participate in funk, the image of Brazilian women around the world, and how a lot of Brazilian women don't particularly care for those images, while others freely exploit that they're Brazilian women to attract attention. So it would take several articles for me to give a full representation of how this is seen within Brazilian borders. But this was going to be the first piece that I start diving into more of these issues. So stay tuned. There's going to be a lot more coming after this. If you got some out of this article, definitely, drop a comment. Consider subscribing to the channel. Consider sharing this video to spark the conversation. And definitely click on the notification button so that you know when I put up another video, which I hope to get up real soon. So for now, I'm gonna end this video. Again, my name is Marcus from the Black Brazil Today blog and YouTube page, where I discuss and analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. See you in the next video.